In this video I'm going to forge an axe, then I'm going to ruin an axe, then I'll dip it in toilet water, and then I'll make a cool button sheath. I'll start with a piece of 10 by 30 mild steel and lay it out the way Niels Ogren does in his video, which is 6 centimeters from the ends on one side and 30 mils from the center on the other side. And I'll be able to find these marks on the anvil later. Just have to make sure they're deep enough. Now we'll take this block of mild steel and start turning it into the preform for an axe, which is not as easy as it looked. Now the problem is, this is the second axe that I've made. The first one was just an old farrier's raft, so it was carbon steel welded to carbon steel with a known piece of steel for the cutting edge in the middle. And that went really well, but carbon steel to carbon steel welds are really easy compared to this. This goes tits up very quickly. I've also gone ahead and welded this to a piece of rebar because it makes it so much easier to hold. And if you're going to do this, the sharper the corner that you have on your anvil, the better, because finding it, you can't really see it too well, but my anvil's quite rounded off, and that made it really difficult to find these lines. Now the reason I started with 10 by 30 steel and not 20 by 40 or something like that is because this is going to be a small axe for carving spoons and small items, and it's going to be used whenever it is used. It's going to be used all day, and so it's only going to turn out to be about 230 grams, which is perfect for an axe this size. Now that I've finished the set downs for the eye, I'm going to start tapering down where the cutting edge is going to be welded into. Now compared to carbon steel that I'm usually forging knives and stuff out of, this stuff is so fun to work. You can forge it quite far into the grey heats, and it just moves so much easier than carbon. I'm also going to do my best to keep this part of the steel clean, because the less forged scale I get on it now, the easier it is going to be to clean up later. And forged scale is the bane of forge welding. Well, you can see how quickly this is moving. It's quite an even taper. I'm quite happy with this at the moment, but it's all going to go wrong soon. Now this is at the point where I was starting to get quite confident, because it's starting to look a little bit like how Niels axes look in his videos. Not exactly the same, but I'm thinking I must be getting quite close. Now I'm going to start pulling down the lugs where the eye is going to be, and this is probably the hardest part of the preform because it's only 30 mils wide. And there just is not a lot of room to get a hammer in there without disturbing the back of it. Eventually I'm going to switch to a crossbeam hammer, which was much easier, but only because the hammer was slightly narrow. After almost finishing the preform, it occurs to me that I could just have used the cross peen, which is literally for drawing out steel laterally, but you do what you do. This was a pain, because I didn't want to get the steel so hot that it would start building up scale significantly. I'd already fluxed it, so it probably didn't even make a difference anyway. But I just voluntarily made my life a nightmare for no good reason. But then, I think half of the point of any craft is voluntary suffering and frustration and pain until you can make the thing that you want, so you just have to suffer through it. And it's, in a way, kind of enjoyable, even when it's going very badly. You can see this isn't great. So eventually I gave in and I just hit the thing up properly, and it actually went alright. It's covered in borax, it's not building up any scale anyway. It would have been fine in the first place. Now my thoughts here were to copy news again and weld the eye together and then put the cutting edge steel in later. And the problem is that I only spent 1 or 2 heats welding the eye shut. I should have spent far more time refining the welds, but I didn't. Now I didn't know how wide the edge was going to be when I started, so I made the cutting edge too big. And I should have taken the time to cut it down here, but I didn't. And what's going to happen here is, although the eye weld looks alright, it is starting to separate slightly. It's just not very refined. So when I put this in, it just loses all tension, and you can see it's already starting to wiggle around far too much. There's just not enough tension on that. But the axe isn't falling apart yet. Now you can see that edge jumping around. There's too much to weld in one heat here. I should have taken much more time to weld that eye. It's kind of painful watching it now because I know how badly this goes. I don't know if you can hear the difference there, but it's sounding like it's one piece. It sounds different when the steel is welded together. And do another heat. And you can see my cutting edge isn't moving around. It's stuck in there. And you can definitely hear that it's one solid piece. It just looks absolutely terrible. This is not how this should look. And the other thing that I should be doing here that I didn't is, while it's at welding heat, refining where the 2 pieces of steel are folded over on the top and the bottom. Now at this point I'm just thinking, this isn't very good, this looks terrible. The cutting edge is too long, which is making it look far worse than it actually is, which I'll get to in a second. But I'm just forging it, seeing if the welds are solid, because ultimately it's good forge welding practice. At this point I stopped filming and just gave up. But then I got the angle grinder out just to see how bad the welds were, and it turned out it's actually alright. A lot of this is alright. So I welded it back together at temperature and got the drift out. But if I could sum up this whole experience with one clip, this would be it. And now I'll just keep working it till I get the shape that I want, and I'll call it a win. And after grinding it on the belt grinder, I'm just going to sit here with these little stones for half an hour or so and polish it out. Now most of this is mild steel, which is much easier to polish than carbon steel, and because it's an axe, the steel isn't that hard. I actually made this about 58 Rockwell on the edge, which is really hard for an axe, but it is a small carbon axe, so being razor sharp is really going to help it, and it's never going to find itself being chopped into a tree. And you can see my little cutting edge steel. This is the best part. Look how solid those welds are. I had nothing to worry about. And now after sitting in coffee for 5 minutes, I'm pretty much in love with this. Now the most efficient way to do this is on the belt grinder, but I'm going to use a draw knife for as much of it as I can because I don't want to stand in front of a belt grinder turning wood into dust when I can do this. It's also an old sledgehammer handle that the top snapped off, which is why it's all oxidized and terrible. It's also really difficult to work, and that is a homemade draw knife that I made a year ago, and I've never actually put proper handles on. I just put these off cylinder octagon things made of pine. But it works. Now, one thing you might not know about the Dremel tool is that it's kind of a gateway power tool, in the sense that you use it and then you find yourself making all kinds of weird justifications in your head about using other power tools. But no, eventually you end up at the belt grinder. It's the fastest way to smooth this out and get the shape right. And because it's a Viking style axe, they always use straight handles, but I'm actually putting a very slight indentation in the middle, and it's going to be slightly octagonal. It makes it safer. Now, one thing I realised while cutting the slot for the wedge here is that I could cut 2 slots and make a cross wedge with contrasting wood, because hickory is, as much as hickory is probably the best handle wood, it's really boring. There's not much special about it. And back to the draw knife to make the wedges. Now this is probably my favourite part of the project, and it's my favourite way to make wedges, which is just in silence. No music or podcasts, just hand tool woodworking. Of course, if you're running about setting up tripods and lights, it's different. But it was still quite enjoyable. And after forgetting to film gluing the wedges in, I'll trim them with that here. Now I want the wood at the top of the handle to match the shape of the steel, and I thought the easiest way to do this would be with a rasp. The round rasp here takes away a lot of material, but it doesn't look very good, so I tripped and fell and landed on a Dremel. The little Dremel did a fantastic job of this though. Far less likely to take away any of the scale from the top that I wanted to keep on. I wanted it to be forged scale black. And here's how it turned out. But more on that later. Now most axes come with a simple fold over sheath with a little button to keep it in place, which is perfectly fine, but this is handmade, and so it's kind of special to me because it's going to a friend, so a special axe deserves a special sheath. So after tracing out the shape of the axe, I'm going to add about 1 centimeter onto one side for a welt. The other side will be where the X slots in, and I want the X to slot in from above because I think that's the safest way to go. So if the X came over the top, at least in theory you could slip or drop the X, or the X could fall out if you don't button it properly, but if the X is on the top, it's much less likely to happen. And this is going to be an absolute razor when it's finished, so I've got to keep it safe. Now at some point I'm going to make a proper leather knife. I'm really getting quite desperate for one at this point. The Stanley knife works alright, but if you're going to do a lot of this, get a proper leather knife. Now, I don't think I invented this, but I haven't really seen anyone else doing it, but I like to just tack the two pieces together, take them to the belt grinder and get the shape exactly matched, and then pull them apart. And I haven't found that that tiny bit of glue makes any difference to the final product, so it seems to work well. Now I'm going to mark out all of my holes on all the pieces. On the main piece, I'm not going to punch all the way through. I'm going to punch them through later. The strap that goes around the back will be punched all the way through, and so will the fold over for the top of the sheath. Every part of the sheath here is going to be tooled with my usual basket weave and border. And it's the only part of the video that I like to speed up because it's so much of the same thing. And it's easier to really see it come to life if it's sped up. Sort of. I just think it's really dull to watch. Now on my last video, Mr. Craig Cook 1571 gave me some advice about punching these holes, where you can punch part of the way through the steel, then drill it, and then punch the other side, and the stitching will still sit nicely and look good, but you don't have to fight with the leather so much. Which would have been really good if I'd known that before I made this, because that is about 1.5 centimeters of leather right there. And I actually cut into the leather a little bit. You can't really tell, but I just about got away with it. Now, you might be thinking, it would have been way easier to stitch this on before you put the sheath together rather than trying to stitch it sort of inside out. And that's exactly what I did, but I didn't check that it fit before I did it, and I had to cut it off and start again. Which is why I'm now having to do this. But eventually it did work, and now I'm going to punch some little holes for the buttons. I find this really enjoyable, I don't know why. I love punching little buttons. And I'll do the same thing where the buttons are going to line up to. And I did measure that about 1 billion times because there's no coming back from it. That's just making a new sheath time. And now you can see just how much leather I had to punch through. And now hopefully what I meant by the axe going over the top into the sheath will make a little bit of sense. And there we are, one finished axe. Thanks for watching.